Well, good morning. This is Ian R. Crane, and it's the morning of Wednesday, 6th of December 2017. And it's a bit overcast this morning. The sun's just looking to rise above the clouds over in the southeast there. But there is some more of the white stuff forecast for later this week, so I'll make the most of the slightly warmer weather. Now, this morning, I want to touch on an issue that is obviously extremely important as this industry establishes or tries to establish a foothold. Now, yesterday, I was actually trying to speak with a local farmer, and I'd never knowingly spoken with this farmer before, but her response to me, before I really said anything, was, "I think you're an extremely arrogant man." Well, yeah, I've heard that once or twice before. Call it assertiveness or whatever, or confidence, but some like to call it arrogance. So, okay, we'll put that to one side. But then her observation was, "I think you're wrong on a lot of things that you say." And I said, wow, well, I'm more than happy to discuss, because I don't profess to be the fountain of all knowledge. And in fact, my mantra is, don't take my word for anything. Do your own research, come to your own determination. And of course, this is something that the government and the industry absolutely have a problem with, because you will never, ever hear the industry or the government make this observation, because they rely on you literally taking their narrative at face value. And obviously, they know fine well that if anybody does look at this for themselves, then they're going to come along and actually sort of make a similar determination to that which I and many others, particularly those that are camping here with us in North Yorkshire, have come to from doing their own research. And then she made an observation that she said, "And you're not here for the right reasons." Well, now, that is very telling, because, and I'll touch on that a little bit later, because, this, of course, is based purely on hearsay, because when you ask people, say, well, on what basis do you make that observation? Where is the evidence? Are you simply repeating something that somebody has told you, or something that you've read and taken at face value? But, it doesn't really matter, because ultimately, I want people to do their own research. But I want to take the opportunity for this farmer and every other farmer, and I want to take a look at some of the evidence. And of course, I've discussed this many, many times before on episodes of Fracking Nightmare. And by the way, the next episode of Fracking Nightmare will be on Thursday, December the 14th at 9 p.m. and that'll be the last one for the year. And that'll be episode, I think it's 114 or maybe even 115. But I'm going to read a bit of an article here, and bear with me, because this is not only an extremely important article, but when I tell you when it was written, you will understand why it is that the government and the industry does not want people to do their own research. The article is titled "Fracking Our Food Supply," and the sub-line is, "Are dying cattle the canaries in the coal mine? Farmers and ranchers are sounding alarms about the risks to human health of hydraulic fracturing." So bear with me as I share some of this article with you. In a Brooklyn winery on a sultry July evening, an elegant crowd sips rosé and nibbles trout plucked from the gin-clear streams of upstate New York. The diners are here with their checkbooks to support a group called Chefs for the Marcellus, which works to protect the floodshed upon which hundreds of regional farm-to-fork restaurants depend. The floodshed is coincident with the Marcellus Shale, a geological formation that arcs northeast from West Virginia through Pennsylvania and into New York State, not dissimilar from the Boland Shale, which comes right across the north of England from the Lancashire coast right across to the Yorkshire coast. Everyone invited here knows the region is both agriculturally and energy rich, with vast quantities of natural gas sequestered deep below its fertile fields and forests. In Pennsylvania, the oil and gas industry is already on a tear, drilling thousands of feet into ancient seabeds, then repeatedly fracturing or fracking These wells with millions of gallons of highly pressurized, chemical-laced water which shatters the surrounding shale and releases fossil fuels. New York, meanwhile, is on its own natural resource tear, with hundreds of newly opened breweries, wineries, organic dairies and pastured livestock operations, all of them capitalizing on the metropolitan area's hunger to localize its diet. But there's growing evidence that these two impulses towards energy and food independence may be at odds with each other. The guests at this event heard about residential drinking wells tainted by fracking fluids in Pennsylvania, Wyoming and Colorado. They've read about lingering rashes, nosebleeds and respiratory trauma in oil patch communities, where mostly rural and undeveloped and lacking in political influence and economic prospects. The trout nibblers in the winery sympathise with the suffering of those communities. But the main concern tonight is a more insidious matter. The potential for drilling and fracking operations to contaminate the food. The early evidence from heavily fracked regions, especially from ranchers, is not reassuring. Jackie Shilk and her 60 cattle live in the top left corner of North Dakota, a windswept, golden-hued landscape in the heart of the Buchan Shale. Shilk's neighbours love her black Angus beef, but she's no longer sharing or eating it. Not since fracking began on her 32 oil and gas wells within 3 miles of her 160-acre ranch, and 5 of her cows dropped dead. Shilk herself is in poor health. A handsome 53-year-old with a faded blonde ponytail and direct blue eyes, she often feels lightheaded when she ventures outside. She limps and has chronic pain in her lungs, as well as rashes that have lingered for a year. Once a visit to the barn ended with respiratory distress and a trip to the emergency room. Shilk also has back pain linked with overworked kidneys, and on some mornings she urinates a stream of blood. Ambient air testing by a certified environmental consultant detected elevated levels of benzene, methane, chloroform, butane, propane, toluene and xylene, compounds associated with drilling and fracking, and also with cancers, birth defects and organ damage. Her well tested high for sulfate, chromium, chloride and strontium. Her blood tested positive for acetone, plus the heavy metals arsenic, linked with skin lesions, cancers and cardiovascular disease, and germanium, linked with muscle weakness and skin rashes. Both she and her husband, who works in the oilfield services, have recently lost crowns and fillings from their teeth. Tooth loss is associated with radiation poisoning, and high selenium levels also found in the Shilk's water. State health and agricultural officials acknowledged Shilk's air and water tests, but told her she had nothing to worry about. Her doctors, however, diagnosed her with neurotoxic damage and constricted airways. I realise that this place is killing me and my cattle, Shilk says. She began using inhalers and a nebulizer, switched to bottled water, and quit eating her own beef and the vegetables from her garden. Shilk sells her cattle only to buyers who will finish raising them outside the shale area, where she presumes any chemical contamination will clear after a few months. My health improved, Shilk says, but I thought, oh my God, what are we doing to this land? Shilk's story reminds us that farmers need clean water, clean air and clean soil to produce healthy food. But as the largest private landholders in the shale area across the nation, farmers are disproportionately being approached by energy companies eager to extract oil and gas from beneath their properties. Already some are regretting it. Earlier this year, Michelle Bamberger, an Itheka, a veterinarian, and Robert Oswald, a professor of molecular medicine at Cornell's College of Veterinary Medicine, published the first, and so far only, gives you a clue as to when this was written, only peer-reviewed report to suggest a link between fracking and illness in food animals. The authors compiled case studies of 24 farmers in 6 shale gas states whose livestock experienced neurological, reproductive and acute gastrointestinal problems. Exposed either accidentally or incidentally to fracking chemicals in the water or air, scores of animals have died. The death toll is insignificant when measured against the nation's livestock population, some 97 million beef cattle, sent to market each year, but environmental advocates believe these animals constitute an early warning, the canary in the coal mine. Exposed animals are making their way into the food system. and it's very worrisome to us, says Bamberger. They live in areas and have tested positive for air, water and soil contamination. Some of these chemicals could appear in the milk and meat products made from these animals. And here we have a dairy farm literally just 500 meters from the well site, and of course exactly the same at Preston New Road. In Louisiana, 17 cows died after an hour's exposure to spilled fracking fluid. Most likely cause of death, respiratory failure. In north-central Pennsylvania, 140 cattle were exposed to fracking wastewater when an impoundment was breached. Approximately 70 cows died. The remainder produced 11 calves, of which only 3 survived. In western Pennsylvania, an overflowing waste pit. Fortunately, they are not permitted here in Europe, and certainly not in the UK. But the waste pit overflowed into a pasture where pregnant cows grazed. Half of the calves were born dead. Yet we're seeing spillage over at Preston New Road because the berms there are not capable of holding the groundwater. So if there are any chemical spills on the Preston New Road site, then the likelihood is that they are going to get washed into the pasture adjoining to the site there. Because of this spillage, the following year's animal births were sexually screwed. Clue there, with 10 females and 2 males instead of the usual 50-60 or 60-40 split. In addition to the cows documented by Bamberger, hair testing of sick cattle that grazed around well pads in New Mexico found petroleum residues in 54 of 56 animals tested. In North Dakota, windborne fly ash, which is used to solidify the waste from drilling holes and contains heavy metals, settled over a farm. One cow which either inhaled or ingested the caustic dust died, and a stock pond was contaminated with arsenic at double the accepted level for drinking water. A similar occurrence, of course, as to what we witnessed in southern Queensland in Australia. Cattle that die on the farm don't make it into the nation's food system, though they're often rendered to make animal feed for chickens and pigs, yet another cause for concern because they're still entering the food chain. But herd mates that appear healthy despite being exposed to the same compounds, farmers aren't required to prove their livestock are free of fracking contaminants before middlemen purchase them. Bamberger and Oswald consider these animals sentinels for human health. They're outdoors all day long, so they're constantly exposed to air, soil and groundwater with no break to go to work or the supermarket, Bamberger says, and they have more frequent reproductive cycles. So we can see the toxic effects much sooner than we would with humans. Fracking a single well requires up to 7 million gallons of water. That's about 5 million imperial gallons. Plus an additional 400,000 gallons of additives, including lubricants, biocides, scale and rust inhibitors, solvents, foaming and defoaming agents, emulsifiers and de-emulsifiers, stabilizers and breakers. About 70% of the liquid that goes down the borehole eventually comes up. In fact, that's an exaggeration. They consider it a good job if 40 to 50% comes up. Now further tainted, this is the wastewater, further tainted with such deep earth compounds as sodium, chloride, bromide, arsenic, barium, uranium, radium and radon. These substances occur naturally, but many of them can cause illness if ingested or inhaled over time. This super salty produced water or brine can be stored on site for reuse, but depending on state regulations it can be held in plastic lined pits until it evaporates or is injected back into the earth. And one of the issues that we have here in the UK, we don't know where that waste is going. Third Energy and the Environment Agency will not confirm where the waste is going. Is it going to Nostrop in Leeds? Is it going to Brand Sands, the Northumbrian water plant in Teesside? Or is it going to be re-injected here in KMA? Yet the Environment Agency here in the UK have a complete disagreement, even within their own department, about whether or not re-injection is appropriate in this heavily faulted country of ours. At almost every stage of developing and operating an oil or gas well, chemicals and compounds can be introduced into the environment. Radioactive materials above background levels have been detected in air, soil and water at or near gas drilling sites. Volatile organic compounds including benzene, toluene, ethylene, xylene waft from flares, engines, compressors, pipelines, flanges, open tanks, spills and ponds. The good news: volatile organic compounds don't accumulate in animals or plants. The bad news is that inhalation or exposure is linked to cancer and organ damage in humans. Underground petrochemicals can migrate along fissures through abandoned or orphaned wells or leaky well casings. The oil and gas industry itself estimates that 60% of wells will leak over a 30-year period. And as Dr. Ingrafia has observed, all wells will leak eventually. Brine can spill from holding ponds or pipelines. It can be spread legally in some places, as we've seen in Queensland again, on roadways to control dust and melt ice. Truck drivers have also been known to illegally dump this liquid in creeks or fields where animals can drink it or lick it from their fur. Although energy companies don't make a habit of telling potential lease signers about the environmental risks they might face, exactly the case here in North Yorkshire, where the landowner here was certainly not told that there would ever be the risk of unconventional gas exploitation here. And of course, John Dewar, the operations director of Third Energy, of course this is Barclays Bank, trading as Third Energy, he has categorically stated in the past, even to the then MP, Anne McIntosh, that he had no intention of fracking here. So we've seen, obviously we get an insight into that man's integrity. In 2008, in a 2008 filing, Cabot Industries cited well site blowouts, cratering, i.e. sinkholes, and explosions, equipment failures, uncontrolled flows of natural gas, oil or well fluids, fires, formations with abnormal pressures, pollution and other environmental risks. In all, in 2011, oil companies in North Dakota reported more than 1,000 accidental releases of oil, drilling wastewater or other fluids, with many more releases likely unreported. Between 2008 and 2011, drilling companies in Pennsylvania actually reported 2,392 violations of law that posed a direct threat to the environmental safety of communities. The reality is that very little is actually reported. The industry works on the basis that they'll only report if there's a risk of actually getting found out. Otherwise, they will simply try and cover it up. Now, many farmers in the shale regions, and of course as I witnessed personally in Queensland in Australia, have taken oil company money to just shut up, to keep quiet. In many cases, the oil companies will compensate them for their loss of livestock or the loss of business purely on the basis that they don't actually spread the word of what has affected them. And of course, we've seen this with the foot and mouth outbreak during Tony Blair's reign, and there's a very insidious underlying cause to that foot and mouth outbreak, which is why many of the farmers who received very, very significant compensatory payments, and rightly so, but part of the compensatory payment was that they would not disclose the actual impact on their farms or the way in which their cattle died, because there is way more to that story than meets the eye. So the oil and gas company simply buys people's silence. Now, actually, I just want to also, that's from, by the way, that article, if you want to read that for yourself, that article is titled "Fracking Our Food Supply," and it was published in November of 2012. 1 month before the moratorium was lifted to give this industry the opportunity to frack here in the UK. So although back in 2012, indeed there weren't too many academic studies, because once again the oil and gas industry would do everything it could to shut down any academic research that might actually undermine confidence in the industry. But now, some 5 years later, there's actually close on 1,000 academic papers that people can take a look at, covering all sorts of aspects associated with this industry. And most of those papers actually conclude that this is an industry that is extremely toxic to the ecology, to livestock, and to human health. But a bit closer to home, last weekend, there was an occupation of the Horse Hill well site just outside Hawley and relatively close to Gatwick Airport in Surrey. Now, this well site has been lying dormant for a couple of years since the well was drilled by UCOG and then flow tested. And the occupation lasted some 60 hours, and although private security were called in to evict the protesters, the protectors there were no arrests. So they were simply clearing the site. But the purpose of that occupation was to try to raise awareness in the local community. Yet the neighbour to that well site is a lady by the name of Alex Gear, and she owns a livery stable, and her fields literally abut right up to the well site, just like this field does here. And Alex has really struggled to get people in the southeast to understand the magnitude of the problems that she is experiencing in the southeast. And I'm just going to read a bit of this article. This article appeared in Get Surrey, and this is about 18 months old, this article now. Volunteers say an equestrian centre which borders the controversial Horse Hill drilling site near Hawley has been ruined, and have growing fears for the health of the animals there. A rig was set up at the drilling site near Gatwick Airport last month by Horse Hill Developments, which UK Oil and Gas UCOG has quite a significant ownership interest in. Since then, staff, volunteers and clients at the adjacent 46-acre Lomond Equestrian Centre have become concerned for their health and that of the 50 horses there. 4 people have had nosebleeds, 2 of whom had never had them before, while 2 horses in particular are suffering runny noses and runny eyes. Volunteer Sarah Trenchard said, "I've been getting headaches and I did have a nosebleed. It's weird how it's coincidental that everyone else is too. It's ever so loud when the lorries are up and down, there's a lot of banging going on, so if I'm getting headaches I wonder how the horses are doing being here all the time. I'm lucky I can actually go home." The horses would normally be out in the fields near the proposed drilling site, but have recently been kept inside due to concerns over their health. Alex Gash, who owns the 32-year-old business and also lives on the site, said, "We are left feeling unsafe. We don't know what the future holds. The animals are at risk. From what I understand, if UCOG did everything absolutely perfectly, there may be no risk. But on the other hand, if it goes wrong, and especially if it goes wrong in a big way, my clients are very concerned." One client, Val Selwell, said, "We are very worried about the environment and what we are breathing. It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it does need to be shouted about because it isn't just here that's going to be affected." And as I said yesterday, getting people in the southeast to take an interest in what's occurring is very difficult, because people in the southeast are extremely time poor. They may be asset rich, but they are time poor, and so they don't have the opportunity, even if they have the inclination, to even look at this. Another concern is the light produced at the rig, with Miss Selwood saying that she was lit up like Blackpool, as well as the sulphur-like gassy smells. She was concerned for the riding for the disabled charity which comes to the Lomond livery stable every Tuesday morning, but that they would have to stop coming if there's any suspicion of gases. Alex Gash said that Sharwood residents were being driven mad by the noise, which varies depending on the wind direction and often comprises a very loud wailing from the drill. The team at the Equestrian Centre, which is on the border between Hookwood and Hawley, first knew about the plans for the site in 2014 when they were informed that there was a planning application for a small drill to go in and check for oil. Alex said it turned out to be a very large drill that changed the field into an industrial site that runs right alongside my livery business. She said she was not overly concerned when told it would just be a nodding donkey pumping unit, but that was before the company returned to do flow tests. "My business is ruined if they are going to continue with anything," she said. "I don't want to run an equestrian centre alongside that. What if it all goes wrong?" She added, "My property can't be worth anything now. 32 years of building up this business has gone. My parents, who have worked all their lives and now in retirement, now have a house that I don't believe is worth anything." That's from Alex Gash, who owns the livery stable just outside, or just alongside the Horse Hill well site in Hawley in Surrey. So, I have never claimed to have the definitive version of anything. I simply encourage people to do their own research. So when I get a reaction like I did from the farmer yesterday, and I've seen it before, in fact we now have a term for it in the anti-fracking community, it's called gonged. So these people have been gonged. In other words, they have had this insidious doubt sown in their minds. Well, you know, it's not quite as bad as it's made out to be, and actually, you know, the industry does try and take a lot of care, and it's very heavily regulated, and you know, those people who tell you that it's not, then maybe you have to consider their motives for doing so. And of course this sows the seeds of doubt. Well, regardless, we won't stop asking people to do their own research, to come to their own conclusions. And I really appreciate, you know, the cognitive dissonance is a very attractive proposition for those business owners who live adjacent to this well site, because, you know, they don't want to believe it. No, 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 go away. I don't want to hear about all the problems that have occurred elsewhere, in the hope that it doesn't happen to them. But you know what? The reality is that this is like Russian roulette, and you might get lucky. You might get very lucky. You might get very lucky and not have an incident right adjacent to your property. But as the plan, as the agenda is to frack this entire region right across the north of England, the reality is that whether it's on your doorstep or whether it's just a few miles away, then you are in the sacrifice zone. And you can bury your heads in the sand as much as you like, or bury your heads in whatever, but unless the British people, and particularly the residents in those communities that are being targeted, actually wake up to what's occurring here and literally are prepared to do whatever it takes, non-violently of course, peaceful, but to do whatever it takes to prevent this industry from establishing a foothold, then unfortunately the prognosis is not pretty. So for those people who have had the seeds of doubt sown in their minds, well, that's very unfortunate. But we're still going to be doing what we've been doing now for the last 5 years, which is simply encouraging people to do their own research. Anyone who tells you that they have the definitive answer to this, either to the industry keeping it safe and not causing any problems, or the definitive answer to stopping it, then basically you should turn and walk in the other direction. The reason that we are stopping this industry from establishing a foothold is because communities are coming together right across the country. We need every piece of creativity, every piece of intellectual knowledge, in every piece of passion within the community to come together to prevent this from ending up like North Dakota or Pennsylvania or West Virginia or Texas or Colorado or California or Oklahoma or Louisiana or Queensland in Australia. It doesn't matter where you look. This industry has left a toxic legacy in its wake. What occurs from here is up to each and every one of us. I have absolutely no financial skin in the game one way or the other, but what I am concerned about is the legacy that we are leaving, potentially leaving future generations in this country. And if you want to question my motives, please just go look in a mirror and then start to do your own research. Thanks for joining me this morning, and I will be back tomorrow morning at 8:30.